The Queen Mary is the most haunted ship on the planet. Once decked out with luxuries, from libraries and nurseries to tennis courts and swimming pools, it was intended to cater to the world's elite. 15% longer and 25% wider than the Titanic, in its day the Queen Mary was the most powerful ocean liner in the world, breaking the record for the highest speed across the Atlantic. But its history was cursed from the beginning. Construction was halted multiple times, companies went bankrupt, and when it did make it to sea, it was responsible for killing hundreds of passengers. But that wasn't all. Stories of bone-chilling deaths, disappearances, and supernatural sightings have spooked passengers for decades. Even to this day, the largely empty vessel still produces strange creaking sounds, tapping, whistling, and laughing. The kind of noises that once filled the huge ocean liner. But what exactly lies below the deck of the Queen Mary that makes it so haunted? And why was it one of the most dangerous places to be during World War II? Stay tuned as we dive into the hidden history of a forgotten ocean liner. Number 1. Cabin B340. The most infamous part of the Queen Mary is by far Cabin B340, which is the main reason ghost hunters flock to the ship every year. Its reputation traces back to just after the end of World War II, when a passenger named Walter J. Adamson stayed in the room, which was a third-class cabin at the time. Midway through the ship's journey, Adamson died suddenly. The cause of death has never been unearthed. But it was what happened afterwards that made Cabin B340 one of the scariest places to be on the water. Over the years, guests staying in the room have reported hearing or seeing disturbances, sometimes in the middle of the night, like knocking at the door or intermittent flickering of lights. None better recorded than a guest in 1966, who ran out of the room screaming for help one night, finding a steward to report the incident to. She swore that her bed covers had been dragged off her body and a man was standing silently upright, right next to her bed. The ship's staff went to investigate, but couldn't find anyone there. It wasn't an isolated incident either. Recently, a team of amateur researchers used an electronic voice phenomena session to ask questions, testing for a response, and they claimed to channel spirits still haunting the ship. One man was petrified after detecting a spectral stick figure sitting beside him during the night using a structured light sensor camera. After more strange occurrences, the cabin was closed to the public for years and has only recently been reopened for thrill seekers, which is now available for the premium price of $499 per night. Below the deck of the Queen Mary is just as unsettling. In 1966, while a young crew member was working in one of the boiler rooms, he was trapped in between two automatic doors. The heavy, watertight doors slowly squashed the sides of his body, crushing his pelvis and chest until he was unconscious. Other crew members were able to evacuate him from the ship and take him to the hospital, but he was soon declared dead. The part of the ship known as Shaft Alley is said to be haunted by his ghost. Workers have witnessed the shape of the young crewman, dressed in blue overalls, running through the halls. A night watchman patrolling the area reported his German shepherd barking at the same doorway where the worker had died. After a metal rolling sound filled the air, they both fled in terror. At times, a whistling sound can be heard through the air, as if someone is calling out for help. Even more frightening than the ghost stories is the tragic naval history of the Queen Mary. Recruited by the British to help the Allies fight Nazi Germany, the ship ended up killing hundreds of their own soldiers. Number 3. Fighting the Germans. In the 1920s, the British were terrified. The Weimar Germany had released two ocean liners, the SS Bremen and the SS Europa, claiming ownership over the transatlantic route. Both were the most advanced ships of the time, powered by geared steam turbines and able to carry over 2,000 passengers each. In response, Britain began constructing a ship of their own in 1929, spearheaded by the Cunard and White Star Line companies, which merged after being hit by the Great Depression. Together with funding from the British government, the budget was a whopping £3.5 million sterling, or over $400 million today. And after several delays and contracts, construction was eventually completed in 1934. Ready for its maiden voyage 2 years later, the name was chosen for the wife of King George V, Mary of Teck, who was queen between 1910 and 1936. The 1,018-foot superliner was dragged down the slip at River Clyde in Scotland by 18 gigantic chains, attached to both sides, smoothly pulling over 81,000 tons into the water. The Queen Mary was so large that it barely fit out of the river, even though the dimensions had been precisely calculated so as to allow it to squeeze through by a whisker. But the ocean liner was only used commercially for less than 5 years before it was reappropriated for World War II to carry troops, and to fit the role and better evade detection, the Queen Mary was painted navy grey, earning it the nickname the Grey Ghost. Much of the interior, all the luxuries that had attracted guests in the first place, was gutted, while furniture, decorations, and cutlery were taken out, making space for more troops. It served as a perfect voyager, traveling at speeds over 55 kilometers per hour, more than twice as quickly as most of the German U-boats patrolling for vessels in the Atlantic Ocean and the English Channel. The Queen Mary was able to outmaneuver their counterparts, but this speed soon led to catastrophe. Number 4. The mass murder of Curacao. In 1942, the Queen Mary collided with one of its own, a C-class light cruiser, the HMS Curacao, just north of Ireland. The Queen Mary was steering in a zigzag pattern at high speeds to guarantee evading German submarines when it faced off with the HMS Curacao. The captain of the Curacao, believing that the huge ocean liner would move out of his way, stayed on course. On the Queen Mary, the commanding officer believed that the smaller ship would move in time for a collision to be avoided. They were both wrong. The Queen Mary hit the Curacao at 2:04 p.m., shattered through the Curacao, splitting it in half, with its aft end sinking to the bottom of the ocean almost instantaneously. With the cruiser being too dangerous for the Queen Mary to stop, the captain made contact with nearby destroyer ships who were escorting to report the collision and send help. But for many, it was too late. Although 101 men survived, 337 were killed. Fearing intelligence leaks, any public witness testimony or reporting was strictly forbidden. At the end of the same year, in 1942, the Queen Mary traveled from New York to Scotland, with over 11,000 people on board. But they almost never arrived. Around 700 miles from the Scottish shore, the ship was hit by a huge wave, towering 28 meters high, slamming into the side of the ship and rolling it 52 degrees off balance. The Queen Mary only just rebalanced itself and was able to finish the journey. But engineers estimated that if the ship had leaned a few more degrees, it would have capsized and certainly killed all passengers on board. That would have been 7 times more casualties than the Titanic. The Queen Mary still holds the record for the most people transported on a vessel, when it carried 16,683 people in 1943. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill lauded the contributions of the ship, which he estimated shortened the war by a year. In the decades after the war, ownership passed through several different owners interested in making it into a hotel or tourist attraction. 2 of these companies filed for bankruptcy, continuing the curse of the Queen Mary. The ship eventually found its way to a permanent dock in Long Beach, California, where it's available to visit now, if you dare.